Mr. Chairman. And Ms. McCabe, in terms of complexity, the rules contain hundreds of pages regarding variations in state plans and emissions trading. For example, you could turn to page 65 of the proposed federal plan/model trading rule. Beginning at the top of the page, EPA states, and I quote, "In the final emissions guidelines, the EPA also discussed the concern that CO2 emissions reductions would be eroded in situations where an affected EGU in a rate-based state counts the megawatt hours from measures located in a mass-based state, but the generation from that measure acts solely to serve load in the mass-based state. In that scenario, expected CO2 emissions reduction actions in the rate-based state are foregone as a result of counting megawatt hours that resulted in CO2 emissions reductions in a mass-based state." Can you decipher that for me?
I think you're reflecting that there is some complexity in this rule. It's partly because of the choices and the flexibility that we provided in response to people's requests on it. But that's reflecting particular situations where states have been asking, how do we deal with one another because power does flow across state borders?
Well, what does that have to do with standards of performance of a power plant? I mean, how does that relate to the states trying to work together? How does this relate?
It's all about the flexibility, and it's a reflection that the power sector works as an integrated system, and so a system that demanded that each individual unit meet a specific rate would be more costly, would be more difficult, would have more reliability implications than a system that affords a lot of flexibility across the system in recognizing the way it actually works.
Okay, I've got another question here, and this has been reflected today by other members that have used coal to supply a lot of their electricity. But in my home state of Missouri, we rely on coal for 83% of our energy generation. And I know that's not true on the East Coast and the West Coast, but in Missouri it is, and that's what the folks I represent are concerned about. The Clean Power Plan places a huge burden on coal-fired power plants. And this rule also restricts, and I don't understand this, the construction of new natural gas plants as a compliance measure. Could you explain to me why the EPA restricts the construction of natural gas-fired power plants as a compliance measure?
So new generation to meet new load is subject to its own set of rules. This particular rule, which addresses existing facilities, is intended to manage that existing fleet of power plants and bring those emissions down. So there's some provisions in there to make sure that that's what the rule is focused on, and those plans are actually delivering the reductions from that existing fleet.
I still don't understand the restriction on new construction of natural gas-fired plants.
Well, we'd be happy to follow up with you or your staff and walk through it a little bit in more detail, Congressman.
Okay, my staff's here today, so if we can do that, I'd be greatly appreciated. And the final rules, interim and final goals for Missouri are even more stringent than the proposed rules. What factors did the EPA consider when reaching this adjustment?
So in the final rule, there was adjustment across the board, across all states, and some of the states' targets went up and some of them went down. It's a reflection of a couple of things. One is that, as I mentioned earlier today, in the final rule we set a uniform emission rate for all coal plants across the country. That's not the way the proposal was designed. And another key feature was information that we got from commenters, from states and utilities and others, really suggesting that the appropriate way to look at this was on a regional basis, because that's the way the power system worked. So when you look at it across a regional basis, states have, and utilities in those states have more opportunities to invest in renewables and cleaner energy than if they were restricted to looking within their state borders, which is an artificial boundary when it comes to the way the industry works.
Okay, so we end up with more stringent rules in flyover country, so we're used to that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Chair, at this time, recognize General